Hey y'all. Miss me? So in the last episode, we covered the must-hears in Rush's catalog, as well as the next steps forward. As you probably saw, that video made for a very beefy watch. So in this second part, we'll discuss some of the deeper digging materials, the stuff you should get into after hearing most of that, as well as the admittedly very few places you should only proceed to with caution, or just flat out avoid. Welcome back to How to Get Into Rush. And, since I kind of brought it up, A Farewell to Kings! This album was actually Rush's big follow-up to 2112. This came out a year afterwards in 1977. 2112 was basically the album that won Rush their freedom. Their previous album before that, let's just say it wasn't well received, and it nearly sunk their career entirely. So badly that 2112 itself was only able to get made because basically their manager just straight up lied to the label and told them they were going to put out something more commercial.
I remember going to Chicago and meeting with Mercury Records to not give up on the band and to not drop the band. I nodded to every request they had. They wanted singles, more commercial. Yeah, sure. I'm sure that's what they're going to do.
He said all of that, and then these guys showed up in kimonos singing about space federations and shit. The balls on these guys. But that album went on to be their biggest success to date. So afterwards, their label basically just shrugged and said, okay, you guys obviously know what you're doing, we'll just leave you to it and let you do whatever the hell you want. Just imagine being a band and having that kind of creative golden ticket. That is the kind of creative freedom every band dreams of getting. You guys are weird, you're dorky, the critics despise you, but you sell records anyway, so, well, like Super Butterbuns would say, be yourself and have fun. And with this album, they did exactly that. And whoo, boy, does it show. I have a feeling some of you are thinking, oh, well, he covered all the good albums in the first video, and now these are all the crappy ones. No. Let me reiterate this, people. Just because something is lower on this particular list does not mean that it's bad. Hell, there are a few albums that are even in the Proceed with Caution section that I would say are still great. But this series is mostly about accessibility. How easy are these albums to get into? It's kinda right there in the name. How representative of the band's sound are these albums? And if a new person started with this record, would it convince them to listen more? And while I like A Farewell to Kings, I like it a lot. If we're talking accessibility, again, it's not bad, but it's a super weird album. The opening title track sounds like something you'd hear at a damn Ren fair. Cinderella Man is a song about Mr. Deeds. No, not that one. Madrigal, again, sounds like something that'd be playing in the background of a medieval times restaurant. I mean, okay, the Tolkien worship was cute on Fly By Night, but here it's getting more than a wee bit excessive. And closer to the heart, there actually is not a damn thing wrong with this song. This is easily considered to be one of Rush's best tunes ever, and
Yes, closer to the heart. Yeah.
I will not argue that. This song is sweeping, it's smart, it has an outstanding melody. 10 out of 10, God tier. This is amazing. Golf clap. Golf clap. But people, when this album decides it wants to get weird, it gets so super weird. Yeah, we're talking about Xanadu. This song, This is a weird-ass song. This song is what you get when you tell a young Neil Peart he can do whatever he wants. And what this motherfucker wants is some goddamn milk and honeydew. This song is... I'm sorry, this song is so cornball. It's so corny. I'm sorry, but it is. It's corny in an enjoyable way, sure, but... Man, even back when this song debuted, people were like, And again, this is another song that shows Rush trying to write a big, sweeping, dramatic song, but overall it just kinda underperforms. It's basically just...
For I shall dine on honeydew! No, I shall not dine on honeydew. Fuck you, Googly Khan!
It's not a completely derpy tune. It's not. Honestly, like, this band would get way derpier on some of their other albums. It's just, here, all the prose is so flowery. Everything is so over the top and melodramatic and, oh my god, for I shall dine on honeydew. It's no wonder a year later, this would be the same guy that would be all like,
I'll write a song about the trees.
This is also the album that features part 1 of the Cygnus X1 suite that I brought up when talking about Hemispheres. And hey, this is a pretty cool track. Not much to argue about here, though it too does succumb to the whole deeper than it really thinks it is problem. I mean, this track takes 10 goddamn minutes to tell us what basically amounts to spaceman flies into black hole. Turns out to be a bad idea, who'd have thought? But it's a stirring melody, and even if the topic isn't very deep, the music sure as hell makes it feel impactful, especially at the end. But again, even though this song is good, one of the biggest issues here is that the album feels like it doesn't have an ending. But again, the big reason that is because this album connects into Hemispheres, the next album. And in my eyes, Hemispheres is basically what Rush was trying to do on this album, only done much more effectively. These days, you can actually buy an EP released by the band themselves that combines both the Cygnus Suite songs together in one package, so you don't have to go to 2 different releases just to hear one damn song. But the fact that they even felt the need to do something like that really speaks volumes about this album. It has its high moments. Like I said, do not skip out on Closer to the Heart, but not all of them are terrifically executed. This was them at some of their most esoteric, obtuse, and needlessly impenetrable in places. It's a good album that really does test your patience at times. But hey, still good nonetheless. Give it a try after you've heard some of the better stuff. Ugh, my brain kind of hurts after talking about that album. How about we take a little break and steer into something more nice, simple, and dumb? Yup, the good old little 1974 album that started it all, Rush's self-titled. Ugh, this one's such a jam. Again, please don't think that because it's on Deeper Digging that it's somehow a lesser or bad album. Hell, I love this stupid little guy. It's loud, raucous, in your face, and just a foot-tapping, butt-wiggling good time. This album is a near perfect snapshot of the early to mid-70s rock scene. Big hooks, bigger solos, and a fun sense of swagger and attitude. Rush's self-titled embodies all of those old traits. I mean, all you gotta do is listen to the opening track, Finding My Way. And that tells you everything you need to know. I really like this album. I was super tempted to put this into Next Steps. Hell, there's a sick part of me that wants to put this in must-hears. I gotta admit, this album was made during the all-too-brief John Rutsey era, long before Neil Peart even joined the band and came along with his, big concepts and his big narratives and his big dumb brain getting in the way and making all this good-fashioned rock and roll music with all his big longy words that I can't understand and the man who hold high places bullshit. Get your
What the fuck just came over me there?
Okay, so the big question comes up then. Why is it here? Well, look, I know this isn't entirely fair to the band themselves. I realize this, but when you compare this album to all of the other stuff that would come later down the line, I mean, collar tug. This album is peak dumb Rush, and I mean peak dumb. Without Neil's signature lyrical and musical influence on this record, it's almost unfair to even call this a Rush album. In the weirdest ass-backwards kind of way, you almost can't count this as a Rush album.
Pretty much everything the band would do after this album had way more ambition, such loftier goals, such more to say to it, After Neil joined the band, the guys didn't really have much interest in being a big, dumb rock and roll boogie-woogie band anymore. So they really quickly just kind of abandoned this more traditional style of playing, as Fly By Night pretty clearly demonstrates. I'm just warning you people, if you listen to this album first and then get a huge hankering and craving for more stuff like it, oh, dearie, dear, do I have some bad news for you.
Rush was a band that had very little interest in being just another dumb rock band. They wanted to branch out and be something bigger and bolder than that. But on here, they're just a bunch of dumb high school kids trying to figure shit out, and you can't really hold that against them. It still serves as a terrific showcase of the sheer, raw, unbridled talent that the guys had, even at this young stage. Even before they'd been able to fractionally realize their full potential, they were still really, really damn good. Hey, there is a very good reason Working Man still gets constant radio play these days, and was a live staple up until the very, very end. A brilliant debut, even if these particular good times weren't made to last.
What a great album. Okay, back on the pain train. Roll the bones.
Oof. Yeah, you've probably heard a whisper or two about this album. Hell, I dropped more than a few not-so-subtle hints in my own videos. Remember when I said Rush went through a really hard spell in the late 80s, early 90s? Yeah, this is one of the two albums we got from that specific era. But hang on. Twist it, shift it, spin it around. Hot take. This album is not as bad as you've probably heard.
Okay. One song is totally as bad as you've heard it is, and that would be the title track.
This thing... Oh, this is just misguided. Grossly misguided. Oh... To be fair, I'm honestly pretty okay with most of the song. No, really, I am. The lyrics are fine. I love the theme and the message behind the song, but some of these synth choices? Oh, barf. At this point, Rush were trying to move on from the synthesizer period, but they clearly hadn't found their footing yet. And, well...
Relax, get busy with the facts. No zodiacs or almanacs, no maniacs, polyester slash is the facts. Gonna kick some booty smacks.
Nope, I'm out. I'm done. See ya! Quit I'm done. I'm not coming back. Fuck you.
Yeah. See this Mr. Bones looking motherfucker right here? This is why you've heard bad things about this album. This thing... Oh, it looks like it's getting ready to tell me not to copy that floppy. I talked about Hold Your Fire being cheesy, but this single song is cheesier than Vermont, Wisconsin, and the entire country of France all smashed into one.
But, oh, and some of you are going to call me absolutely bonkers for this, but I could almost see this actually working big if they'd gotten the right people in to take care of it.
I mean, this was 1991, so rap kinda had a whole other thing happening to them around that time. Probably not a lot of the top people in the genre would have been compatible, but hey, there was still a market for more chill hip-hop acts. There were plenty of people they could have gone to get this done properly. LL Cool J, Q-Tip, maybe one of the De La Soul guys or something. Somebody who's chill enough to hang out with your dad, basically. You could have made this work.
There was even talk at one point of bringing in John Mother-Humping Cleese to do the whole rap thing as like a joke rap. That would have certainly been interesting. As a Python fan, I can get behind that for sure. But here's the thing, they didn't do any of that. What they did was they had Neil write the rap and had Getty perform it.
Yep. Neil wrote the lyrics, and they just lowered Getty's voice in post to help create the effect of rapping.
Gonna kick some booty smacks. It's very relaxed.
Let's just say it's performed about as well as you would expect a hip-hop verse being done by a bunch of 47-year-old Canadian sci-fi nerds to be.
Yes. Roll the Bones, the song, is very unfortunate. People love to slam this album. Hell, this is probably the most popular to hate Rush album out of their entire catalog. But people, I'm telling you, this album is better than you've probably heard it is. Because when you start reminding people of all the other tracks that are on this album, they tend to change their tone pretty goddamn quick.
Oh man, Roll the Bones sucks, it's so bad. What about Dreamline? Oh yeah, Dreamline's good, but still, dude. Bravado? Oh yeah, that one's really good too. Ghost of a Chance? Wait, that one's on Roll the Bones? Yup, and Heresy, and The Big Wheel, and Neurotica. Are you sure we're talking about the same album? Are you sure that stuff's not on Presto? I'm positive this stuff isn't on Presto. I mean, look, yeah, that title track is a big turnoff, not to mention the overall thinness and wispiness of the production, and those lingering bad smells from the synth period still haven't completely washed themselves off yet. But man, if you haven't spun this album in a while, skip the title track and give it another rundown. I think you'll find that on the whole, it holds up a lot better than you'd think it would. But, you know, skip that title track. Like, legit, skip it. Please. I implore you, skip it. Treat yourself. You have nothing to prove. There's no need to suffer. You're nobody's hero. Don't do that to yourself, man.
I mean, please, don't just do it for the challenge or anything like that. I mean, if you want something that's a little trickier, something that is a bit more of a challenge to listen to, try on Snakes and Arrows.
Oh, Snakes and Arrows. Man, I really wish I liked you more. Again, this isn't a bad album, not at all. There's some absolutely wonderful tracks on here. Far Cry, for example, is right up there with songs like Animate, Driven, and Vapor Trails in terms of excellent late period Rush, as are Workin' Them Angels, Bravest Face, and Good News First. And not to mention Faithless.
Again, it's another slow track of theirs that's absolutely inspirational. It's a song about atheism and agnosticism and the various merits of being a non-religious person that I, quite predictably, adored. I mean, this is another song that came along during my own personal crisis of faith, and Yeah, it was really comforting to hear words like this. You know, it holds a very deep personal place in my heart. This is literally one of my most favorite Rush songs out of their entire catalog, personally. This is up on my top 10 list really, really high. Again, Snakes and Arrows, I wish I liked you more.
Yeah, this album is a lot of fun, for the most part. If I'm being completely honest, though, apart from the songs that I really like, I just often find myself hitting skip a lot on this particular record. I'm not even 100% sure why, necessarily. It could be that this is a pretty long sit for a Rush album. Now, Rush is often poked fun at for having big, bloated, long-as-hell songs, sure, but back in the day they often made up for that by having their albums be pretty nice and punchy overall. For as long as some of the stuff on like Hemispheres is, it's only 4 tracks and a very lean 36 minutes. Most of Rush's albums prior to Hold Your Fire easily sit under the 40-minute mark. That was because most of those albums were made during the vinyl era, where you couldn't squeeze much more than 40-45 minutes onto one record. That forced them to cram a lot into a very tiny package, and it worked very well for them.
Once CDs became a thing, though...
Yeah, that gave the band a lot more wiggle room, and as a result, a lot of their later work tends to be more of a sit. Whatever you think of A Farewell to Kings, at least you're done with it in about 37 minutes. This album, 62. Oof. And it feels like there's a decent amount of filler on this record, too. Not many Rush albums are bad about filler, but man, this one... Oh, it has 3 instrumental tracks on it, for God's sake. Though, I don't know. Even though I say the length is a problem, Vapor Trails is also a very long album, but I never have any issues with that. That album never feels long. I don't know, this album just feels long. I don't know, this one just doesn't have quite the same amount of weight or character or personality to stop it from feeling like kind of a drag in places. It kind of feels like there's too much going on this album overall. Like I said, one of my favorite Rush songs is actually from this record, so I'm not completely writing it off or anything. The stuff that's good is very good. It can just be a little much. Just saying, this is probably another album that's better for further down the line.
And as much as I hate to say it, especially since this album in particular is kind of a fan favorite, I could also say all of this exact same stuff about their last album, Clockwork Angels.
I hate to even say something like that, because upon re-listening to this album again for these videos, I rediscovered that yeah, Clockwork Angels is actually a terrific album. It's super ambitious, the music absolutely wrecks for the most part, it's got a good sense of atmosphere, and the narrative is like a super zhuzhed up kind of steampunk hybrid between Hemispheres and something like Fountain of Lamneth. I honestly really dig Clockwork Angels, but...
Good God, I forget this album exists. Like, all the damn time.
This is an album I always enjoy spinning in those few times I can get around to it. And you know, when this thing first came out, I remember being so hyped up about it. But I don't know, it's just not a record that sticks to you very hard. You know what I mean? I listen to it, I enjoy listening to it. And then it completely leaves my mind for 2 years at a time, and, you know, then somewhere in the distant future I'll be like, oh yeah, Clockwork Angels, that was a thing. That came out. I remember liking that album. Was that good? It starts off well with Caravan brought up to be the title track and The Anarchist. It wraps up very solidly with Headlong Flight, Wish Them Well, and The Garden. It's one of their more forceful and aggressive albums. I mean, the production has so much oomph in the bass and guitars. And this is a very unique album in that it's Rush's first ever attempt at a full concept record. And overall, they do a decent job with it. Yeah, that's the thing. You'd figure A concept record would be kind of a no-brainer for a band like Rush, who loves nothing more than to write songs with strong narrative focuses and actual characters and development and shit, right? Yeah, for some reason they never actually did a concept record until the very, very end. I mean, God, that almost feels like a missed opportunity, doesn't it?
But while I like this album, I cannot recommend it as like a good starting point necessarily. And as much as I hate to admit it, I can't even give you like a good, solid, concrete reason why. It's just... okay.
Like I mentioned, it's an album that just doesn't stick to me for some reason. Again, that could be due to its somewhat excessive length, 66 minutes this time around. Again, I've seen bands do way worse, especially these goddamn days, am I right? But it's still a bit more late period Rush in one sitting than I think most newbies would want to reasonably swallow. Look, frankly, this is also an album that could stand to lose a few pounds. It is a little flabby.
But still, I mean, a Rush album with a few minor issues is still way better than a lot of bands can do at their finest hour. But the name of the game here is accessibility, and when it comes to this album, and even Snakes and Arrows too, your mileage is kind of bound to vary. I say listen to the singles that came out for these two albums and kind of judge for yourself. Who knows, you may like these albums way, way more than I do. But, speaking of accessibility, oh boy, this is the part I've been dreading across two videos, people. Now we have to cover, in my own humble personal opinion, where the places in Rush's catalog are that you should either proceed with caution or just outright avoid entirely. Oh, quit giving me that look. I can hear your screams across time and space. Yes, people, this album deserves to be on this side of the list. Booing me doesn't make it any less true.
Rush has a few infamous albums in their career, but this is the infamous Rush album. Remember when I mentioned the one record that nearly killed their career? Ta-da! Okay, look. See the name of this section? See it? It's avoid and proceed with caution, okay? And this album right here, this is the reason proceed with caution albums exist. This is like the definitive proceed with caution album. At the same time, though, this is not an avoid album at all. Fuck, Bastille Day absolutely wrecks. Bastille Day destroys. Seriously, it's one of the best goddamn songs Rush ever wrote, especially for their early period. And you know, it would be a crime if you missed out on it. Bastille Day is just criminally good. That song on its own would save it from the avoid section entirely. God, I just wish it were on a better album, dude. Hell, even some of the other tracks, like I Think I'm Going Bald and Lakeside Park, are solid enough.
But fuck me running. The Necromancer and the Fountain of Lamneth. Oh God, these two songs right here are the tracks that nearly killed Rush. And people, I completely understand why. This is some weird shit. Even for them, Necromancer is just straight up goofy. The song is literally about the three members of Rush, like the dudes in Rush, not like characters or representations or any literary device. No. Alex Lifeson, Geddy Lee, and Neil Peart, the guys, getting transported to J.R.R. Tolkien's literal Middle-earth Hobbit universe somehow. And then they get chased around all over the place and get harassed by Sauron himself. People, I really hate to use this clip, but God, wouldn't that have been a hell of an addition to the extended cut of the movies? God, if only Peter Jackson had had the balls. Release the true cut, you coward!
All that weird shit, and then, out of nowhere, motherfucking Bytor shows up. Yeah, remember him from Fly By Night? On that album, they treated him like a villain, but here, I guess he's a hero now for some reason. He basically pulls a Gandalf and fights off Sauron and his forces for the band members while they hightail it out of Middle-earth. And wait, I thought Bytor was supposed to be some metaphorical version of Geddy Lee. At least that's what Genius says it's supposed to be. How can he be here in the actual song if Geddy himself is in the song too? And
people never write fan fiction when you're high.
I think we were pretty high when we made a lot of that record, and it sounds like it to me.
I mean, at least the music in that song is still pretty okay. It's a bit overly complicated even for this era of Rush, but hey, I can generally survive a sit through this one.
Fountain of Lamneth, on the other hand...
Fuck me till I feel pretty, this goddamn song. 20 minutes. 20 minutes with a mountain of different tempo and mood shifts. A narrative that's weird and clunky and depressing as balls. Oodles and oodles of overly melodramatic, overly flowery gobbledygook.
This is like being forced to listen to the inane, rambling warrior poetry of the most pretentious art student you know, immediately after having to listen to his smelly otherkin roommate's stupid, dumb as hell Lord of the Rings fanfiction. And both of them were high as balls when they wrote them.
20 goddamn minutes we sit through this miasma of half-realized ideas and concepts and a tone and musical structure that can't make up its mind even slightly, only to hear the story of guy is born, guy wants to find Fountain, guy fucks up finding Fountain, guy gets some of that beauty, guy stops giving a crap about Fountain, guy finally finds Fountain and realizes... holy shit, it's just a fountain. I've wasted my life.
Oh, man. These songs are just a trial, dude. They are just an endurance test.
Look, people, I don't care if my admittance of this forces me to turn in my official Rush fanboy card or whatever. I have serious problems with the back end of this album, and I completely understand why it nearly killed their career. I also understand why only Rush turbo nerds can see this thing as anything other than... challenging. Again, it's not an album I'd say avoid entirely. Most of that A-side is killer, and you can still appreciate the ambition of the longer songs for sure, but please, pretty please, do not listen to this album until you've listened to pretty much every other Rush album first.
And please, for the love of all things holy, do not make this your first Rush album. Holy shit, this is the kind of album that sets newbies on fire and leaves them running, screaming into the woods. Listen to this album, but proceed with caution. Man, talking about Caress of Steel is just... fried my brain here. God, Rush have a lot of albums that'll do that to you if you're not careful. Oh, how about we take a bit of a break from that by moving from an album that's unbelievably difficult to an album that's kind of coasting on easy mode. 1989's Presto.
So, around the time of Hold Your Fire, people were getting really sick of Rush's whole synthesizer shtick, and after reception of that album kinda slumped, they themselves even started to sit up and take notice. It was, yet again, time to shift directions. But like I mentioned in the last video, it was the end of the 80s, which unfortunately meant everything had to suck.
See, Rush kind of fell into the same trap that a lot of artists were falling into in the late 80s, early 90s, in that they were trying to build and develop a new sound without having much of an idea what that sound should actually be. And believe me, on this record, it shows. It shows with a vengeance.
I mean, at least other albums I'm not crazy about, like Caress of Steel or Farewell to Kings, have their brilliant moments and are at least interesting when they do fall short. They fail in places for sure, but they all fail in glorious ways. This record? Man, I have spun this thing at least a few dozen times since I've walked this earth, probably more, and I can barely tell you a thing that happens on it. I don't remember the singles, I don't remember what the worst songs are, I don't remember any standout riffs or hooks or moments or anything. I remember nothing about this album, either positive or negative. I listened to it again before recording this voiceover, and I can't even remember anything from it. Just, wow.
And that's the worst part about an album like this. It leaves me with nothing to say. I can't really describe to you an album that's drab and boring and lifeless and blah. You have to feel how this album doesn't work. It's a lot like a game that has bad controls. I can't really describe to you how bad the inputs are, or how laggy, or how not working the controls of a game would be. You just kinda gotta hold it in your hands and experience it for yourself.
I'll try, I guess, though. The production on this album's really crummy. That doesn't help matters, for sure. Nothing has any punch. Everything feels watered down, weak, and soupy. Even though they were trying to move away from the synths, they're all still way too prominent in most of the mixes. Geddy's bass is pushed way too far into the background, and Alex still will not let go of his sweet baby reverb pedal, and you can't make him, you son of a bitch! But yeah, people, this album just... it doesn't work. I'm sorry, it really doesn't. This might be the only flat-out avoid I would put on this list. It's such a bore. It's such tedium. It's such a lifeless, dull, and uneventful experience. I often forget this album exists, and that might be for the best.
Like, even other huge Rush fans I know barely even remember Presto exists. It's not a very lovable album. Again, not as bad as other stuff out there. Hell, especially for its time. Believe me, around the late 80s, early 90s, you can get way, way worse than Presto. But by Rush's own standards, this is really about as bad as it gets. Yeah. I can say one good thing about this album, I guess. At least it doesn't physically hurt to listen to. That's a plus.
Okay, I bet some of you are confused. Didn't I say this was a must-listen in the last video? Indeed I did. Vapor Trails is a brilliant, powerful, and stirring piece in Rush's catalog.
But back before the remixed edition, this album used to be a literal pain to listen to.
Okay, remember what I said at the end of the Vapor Trails segment?
Get this version of the album, not this version of the album.
Holy shit, I motherfucking mean that. Get the remixed version, because the original mix of this album... Ow! See, the original mix fell foul of something called the Loudness War. Now, the Loudness War is a topic so complicated and convoluted that it would take another 2 videos devoted strictly to itself to even slightly explain, but it basically amounts to a record giving a big ol' middle finger to compression and proper leveling and mixing, and just blasting your ears out with clipping. You know, a lot like my early videos.
Death Magnetic was a victim to it, Chinese Democracy was a victim to it, and Rush's original cut of Vapor Trails was one of the decade's first notable victims of it.
And even though a lot of people loved the original album, one of its biggest complaints, even at the time, was that it seemed to be mixed by freaking howler monkeys. People, believe me, it was pretty bad. The original version used to legit give me headaches. Do you have any idea how painful it is to love an album that literally physically hurts you?
People, I do just have to honestly admit to you, that was one of the things that bumped Vapor Trails up into the must-listen list. You know an album's good when you're willing to risk a migraine in order to hear it.
To be fair, the band completely agreed with that, and in 2013 they finally, mercifully, released Vapor Trails Remixed, and this is the version of the album you should hear, because this thing, I mean, yes, it's the same songs, and those of you that don't have an ear for production might not even notice it at first, but believe me, once your temples start to throb, you'll really sit up and take notice. It's not like the original cut is the easiest version of this album to find out in the wild anyway. Most streaming services and whatnot don't even give you the option to hear this version. Like, that's the thing. If you're gonna listen to this album, it's something you'll have to inflict upon yourself. If you do listen to this, you only have yourself to blame.
Oh man, well that covers everything. We've talked about every single Rush album, and a few of them even twice. Thanks again for tuning in. I'm so glad we've been able to... Huh? What do you mean there's one more? Oh, but that's an EP. I don't like talking about those.
Oh, yeah, feedback. That's also a thing. This was released between Vapor Trails and Snakes and Ladders. And oddly enough, it's a covers album. And it's not really all that interesting. I don't know, some people like it, but I'm not one of those people. For one, the variety of covers on this thing is really pathetic for a covers album. It's an 8-track EP that features 2 Yardbirds covers, 2 Buffalo Springfield covers, 2 covers that are technically Who songs. That's 3/4 of your covers album only devoted to 3 bands. For a group as influential as Rush is, you'd figured they'd have more influences to draw from, you know? And the covers themselves? Oh, I don't know, man. It's very hit and miss. Some of them are at least appropriate, with stuff like The Seeker and Summertime Blues coming out fairly okay. Hell, this is the closest to a self-titled Rush experience you can get apart from the self-titled album itself. But they also have some weird choices on here, like they cover Heart Full of Soul and For What It's Worth, and oh man, I'm sorry, these do not translate as well. It's not horrid or anything, but if I'm listening to Rush, it's because I want to listen to Rush, you know?
But, I mean, can you really blame me here? I mean, Rush's own music is just so fascinating, so experimental, so bold, so creative, so amazing, influential, vast, and stunning that it's flabbergasting to all take in. It's an outright miracle we were able to even get a band this impressive during our lifetimes. Man, I get why taking one look at this massive mountain of outstanding accomplishments, reinventions, and groundbreaking new discoveries in making modern music can be a bit intimidating, but even their worst albums are often still engaging and interesting, even at their worst. Some of the music they created was the best of its time. I mean, when this is one of the worst things your catalog has to offer, I'd say you've still done a pretty damn good job, wouldn't you? People were super bummed when Rush announced their retirement this year. I was bummed too, but after listening to all of the wonderful, intelligent, passionate, and heart-touching touching music they've given to us over such a long period of time. If anybody has earned the right to hang up their hats, it's Rush. Because when you've got a catalog like this, you really don't have to prove a damn thing to anybody. Thanks again for tuning in, people. I've been Crash Thompson, and remember, the only opinion that really matters is your own. Thanks again for tuning in.
Super special thanks to Kyler Oram and Jack Brunton.